Welcome everyone to the last how-to for the Human Resources expansion. I am, as always, Chaos in the Sky, and today I'll be showing you how to play as DIO from Jojo's Bizarre Adventure Part 3, Stardust Crusaders, in anime Villainous. DIO is a powerful vampire who evaded death many years ago by stealing the body of his sworn enemy, Jonathan Joestar. However, Jonathan's legacy survives, and his descendants are closely tied to DIO by destiny. So long as they draw breath, he can never know peace. Since DIO cannot live the life of decadence and supremacy he so desires until the Joestar family is no more, they must be dealt with. More specifically, the most recent Joestar, Jojo, must be killed. When DIO's loyal stand users prove incapable of defeating Jojo themselves, it falls to DIO to put an end to the Joestars personally, in a long-fated battle. With DIO wanting to settle things with Jojo, as you can probably guess, his objective in anime Villainous centers around defeating Jojo. Although to be more specific, DIO has to play Jojo to Egypt, where he will then have to defeat him for the final time in Showdown. So before we do anything else, let's take a look at Jojo. Jojo is a hero tile similar to All Might. He starts in play at Japan, DIO's rightmost location. Jojo has 6 strength, a rather difficult number to deal with, and he has 2 abilities. First of all, Jojo cannot be defeated if there is another hero at his location. This means if any heroes are hanging out with Jojo, you have to defeat them first to be able to beat him. His second ability is how we achieve DIO's objective. After Jojo is defeated, if he was not at Egypt, you have to play Jojo to an adjacent location. This is the only way for DIO to get Jojo over to Egypt, by defeating him and using his own ability. Since Egypt is the far left location and Japan is the far right, you'll have to defeat Jojo 3 times to move him across your territory into Egypt. Once he's there, you enter Showdown, and you'll have to beat Jojo 1 last time since you can't win unless there are no heroes in your territory. Just punch the guy a bunch of times until you win. Sounds easy, right? But as usual, it's more complex than it may seem. To get started on how DIO will accomplish this feat of beating Jojo multiple times, let's look at 2 very important things: DIO's villain ability and his unique stand user deck. DIO's ability is a fun one. His strength is equal to the number of villain cards that you've played during your turn. Naturally, this number resets back to 0 at the start of every turn, so you start each turn as DIO with 0 strength, and then get stronger for each card that you play. I recommend having some strength tokens on hand to keep track of the amount of cards you played in a turn, as that makes it easier to keep track of. Now, you can see that DIO has 2 double play locations, which should mean he can only get up to at most 2 strength in a turn. However, DIO has many options for how to play more villain cards in a turn to get his strength higher, which you'll see later in the video. For now, you just need to know that the more cards played in a turn, the stronger DIO is for a clash. Moving on from DIO's ability, we have his stand user deck. DIO's stand user deck is a third deck unique to him that contains 24 unique allies and 1 item within it. You heard that right. A total of 25 cards. Each one of them does something different from the other. They have different costs, strengths, abilities, and so on. Quite simply, this video would take far too long if I covered all 25 of them. We still have a villain deck and fate deck to go through. What I'm going to do instead is explain a few specific cards to give you an idea of the stand user deck, and leave the rest for you to find out when playing as DIO yourself. It's a little finicky, but you can break the stand user deck down into 2 types of cards: utility or combative. Utility stand users are cards that typically have low strength value, most often 1 or 2, but they have incredible abilities that either give DIO a general buff, weaken a hero to make them easier to defeat, or even protect other stand users. The 3 stand users we're going to look at to give you an idea of utility stand users are Oingo and Boingo, Daniel, and Terrence. Oingo and Boingo are perhaps the definition of utility. They have no strength, but their ability is that at the end of your turn, you draw until you have 5 cards in hand. DIO loves having more cards for more options, especially when it comes to his villain ability. The extra draw is a huge help for him. While Oingo and Boingo are straightforward though, Daniel is a lot more complex. When he's played, you choose a non-Jojo hero at his location. That hero becomes an item attached to Daniel, and their ability is ignored. When Daniel is discarded, that hero is then played to Daniel's previous location. Daniel essentially lets you take a hero out of the equation, although only momentarily. There are fate cards that can discard allies, ergo Daniel, putting the hero back where they were before. But even still, removing a hero even temporarily can be a huge help for DIO, especially if you're in Showdown and just need the heroes gone for that 1 turn to cinch victory. Also take notice of the non-Jojo clause that Daniel has. Jotaro is immune to a lot of specific cards that target heroes, and that's the purpose for that wording. You'll see it on a lot of cards in DIO's stand user deck. Our last utility stand user is Terrence. If DIO is at Terrence's location, you may perform one action that is covered by a hero at that location. Very important to note here is that Terrence does not specify a non-fate action. He can be used for your top fate, making him very useful. It also explains why he costs 3 power. He doesn't have to be used for the fate action though, he can be helpful at other locations too if you find them more important. Either way, he's a huge benefit. Moving on from utility, we have the combative stand users. Now you can use utility stand users for vanquishes, of course, but they typically have low strength. Combative stand users are often the opposite. They have high strength values, often 3 or 4, and their abilities will usually either help them perform vanquishes on heroes, or give themselves more strength to better combat heroes. Our 3 examples for this one will be Chaka, Pet Shop, and Vanilla Ice. Chaka is only a 2 strength ally, but what puts him in the combative class is his ability. When Chaka is used to defeat a non-Jotaro hero, that hero becomes an ally at the bottom of your territory instead of being discarded, with their ability being ignored. This lets you use Chaka for a vanquish while getting yourself another ally in exchange, and given that heroes are likely to be at Jotaro's location thanks to Jotaro's ability, you can probably use them on Jotaro soon after. After Chaka, we have Pet Shop, a 4 strength ally with an ability meant for a quick fight. When a hero is played to Pet Shop's location, you may perform a vanquish action using Pet Shop. 4 strength is enough to defeat most heroes once they're played, and you can even do a fun little combo with Pet Shop involving Jotaro. If there's another ally to help him out strength-wise, you can defeat Jotaro, playing him to an adjacent location that may have Pet Shop there, and then use Pet Shop to immediately defeat him again. Lastly, we have Vanilla Ice, and man, this guy is a doozy. 4 costs with 5 strength, he's DIO's strongest ally. His best part, though, is his ability. When Vanilla Ice is used to defeat a non-Jotaro hero, you may pay 3 power to remove Vanilla Ice and that hero from the game. Being able to take an entire hero out of the equation for the rest of a game is huge, and with Vanilla Ice's strength, he can do it easily. Even without his ability, 5 strength is a lot, so you'll be glad to have him around either way. That rundown should give you a pretty good understanding of the stand user deck. There are 19 other cards in there, each with their own abilities, so you'll rarely find yourself wanting for options. However, you might be wondering, but Chaos, how do we play cards from the stand user deck in the first place? The answer to that is using other cards in DIO's villain deck. So let's get into his villain deck, starting with the 3 cards that will let you make use of the stand user deck. First is DIO's most common card that you'll no doubt use a lot when playing as him, a Trivial Matter. When you play a Trivial Matter, you reveal the top 3 cards of your stand user deck. Then you may choose one of them, pay its cost, and play it, discarding the rest. This is your main engine for playing cards from the stand user deck. 2 very important things to realize about a Trivial Matter, though. First of all, playing one of the revealed cards is a may. That means if you don't want to play any of the revealed stand users, or you can't afford to play them for that matter, you can just choose not to. All 3 of them will then be discarded. Second of all, the stand user deck cards count as villain cards. That means when you play one, DIO's ability gives him 1 more strength for that turn. Because of that, if you play a Trivial Matter and then play a stand user card as a result, you've played 2 villain cards in 1 play a card action, which is one of the main ways DIO uses his ability to get a large amount of strength. Our next card is Vampirism, which lets you choose a card from your stand user discard pile, pay its cost, and play it. Much like a Trivial Matter, this will lead to you playing 2 villain cards in 1 play a card action, giving DIO more strength. Vampirism is the only card that lets you play stand users from the discard, so if one of them ends up there some way, it's your only option to get them back without reshuffling the stand user deck. Lastly, we have DIO's Coffin, an item with 2 abilities. Its first ability lets you look at the top card of your stand user deck at any time, which can be a big help in planning out your turns. But its major benefit is the second ability. When performing a play a card action, if DIO is at the Coffin's location, you may play the top card of your stand user deck instead of a card from your hand. This lets you play stand users without having to discard some of them, like Trivial Matter does, and you can use it repeatedly. The downside, of course, is that this will only count as 1 villain card play, so it won't help with DIO's ability quite as much. Moving on from stand user playing cards, let's look at DIO's other effects, like The World and I Can Feel Them. The World is one of DIO's most versatile cards. When played, you draw a card, then you may perform 1 non-fate action that you have already performed this turn. This can be used in a multitude of ways, but most often you'll likely want to use it to either gain extra power or play more cards for DIO's villain ability. Speaking of power gain though, I Can Feel Them will help you with that a lot. When played, you gain 1 power for each location in your territory that has a hero, plus 1 additional power if there is a hero at Egypt, DIO's leftmost location. This will always net you at least 1 power, because either Jojo is in play somewhere, or if he's not around, that means you're in Showdown, and there must be another hero, otherwise you would have won already. Now we move on to DIO's final 3 effects, starting with Dark Design. This card lets you choose either form, item, or scheme. Then you reveal cards from the top of your deck until you reveal a card of the chosen type. You put that card into your hand, and all other cards get discarded. This is a good way to dig for important cards like DIO's Coffin, and it can just be a big help to get DIO to a reshuffle to start cycling back cards like The World or Vampirism, if you've run out of them. Next is Devoted Follower, a card that manipulates the stand user deck to better help you with playing the stand users you want. When played, you choose a card from your stand user deck, then shuffle your stand user deck and put the chosen card on top of it. Great to get the stand user you want quickly, especially if comboed with DIO's Coffin. Just make sure to pay attention to how it only targets a card that's in the stand user deck. You can't use it to put a stand user in the discard back on top. The last effect is Flesh Bud, an expensive card that lets you choose a hero from your Fate discard pile and play them. That hero then becomes an ally at the bottom of your territory with their ability ignored. This can be great when you need an ally with a high strength value quick, since all of DIO's heroes have at least 3 strength, as long as you're willing to pay the hefty price. With effects covered, let's move on to DIO's other 2 items, Road Roller and Knives. Road Roller is an item that you attach to a hero, and as a result, that hero gets -3 strength. This can be amazing to get Jojo down low enough that DIO can reasonably clash with him, or make it easier for his allies to vanquish him. It can also be a big help on other pesky heroes, as it'll get most of them at or near 0 strength. If we really want to help DIO with clashing though, we should look at his last item, Knives. You put Knives at a location, and then before you clash, you may discard Knives to clash with a hero at that location instead of your own location, then end your turn. This means that you can go to a location with more player cards, get DIO's strength up with his ability, and then use Knives to take out a hero from a distance. Which reminds me, DIO does have 1 ally in his villain deck rather than his stand user deck, and that's Nukasaku. He's got 0 strength, but his ability is a very helpful one. During your turn, you may discard Nukasaku from your territory to perform a play-a-card action. An extra play-a-card is always nice, but even more so for DIO, since it will give him at least 1 more strength for playing another villain card. Following all of those items, effects, and the lone ally, we have DIO's 2 schemes, Joy and Fear and Menacing Presence. Joy and Fear is a fun one, as it triggers when the targeted player ends their turn with less power than DIO. Once it's triggered, DIO may play the top card of his stand user deck for free. A fun trigger that will make your opponent think twice about spending their power, and getting that top stand user out for free is always a nice benefit. Menacing Presence also has a unique trigger. When the targeted player moves from a location with a Fate action to another location with a Fate action, you trigger Menacing Presence. Once triggered, DIO may look at the top 4 cards of his Fate deck, then return them to the top in any order. Keep in mind that if a location's Fate action is covered, it still counts as a location with a Fate action. So even if there's a hero covering the top Fate of your opponent's territory, if they move between their 2 Fate locations, it'll still trigger Menacing Presence. The last card of DIO's villain deck is his only form, Awakened. Awakened can only be played if DIO has a strength of 3 or more during Showdown, and the reward is he gets a permanent 4 strength for clashing. You'll have to make use of DIO's ability to get the 3 strength you need to be able to play Awakened, but to have that guaranteed clashing strength when you're trying to close out Showdown, it'll be well worth it. That's all of DIO's villain deck, so now we move on to the Fate deck. DIO has 5 heroes, 5 effects, and of course a challenge to contend with. Let's take a look at the heroes first, starting with Iggy and Avdol. Iggy is a 4-strength hero, and his ability is that when performing a vanquish action to defeat him, at least 2 allies must be used. This means he'll take up some resources to defeat using allies, so you'll most likely want to clash with him. Easier said than done when he has 4 strength though, since that takes 4 villain card plays. It's a tough little doggy. Speaking of tough to defeat with allies, Avdol is our other 4-strength hero, and his ability is that when performing a vanquish action to defeat him, allies with a strength lower than Avdol's strength cannot be used. This is going to be a headache to deal with because it means you'll once again have to get up to a high 4 strength to clash, or you'll need to use your stronger allies to take Avdol down, allies that you'd likely rather use on Jojo. Moving on from those 2, we have our other 3 heroes, Polnareff, Kakyoin, and Joseph. They're all 3 strengths as opposed to 4, but they have very troublesome abilities. We'll look at Polnareff first. He gets +1 strength if Jojo is at the Middle East, which is DIO's middle left location, putting him at 4 strength. However, if Dio has made it to Showdown, then Polnareff instead gets +2 strength, making him the strongest after Jotaro with 5. 5 strength is not a number Dio likes having to deal with, as it's just outside of his awakened form strength and just out of reach for almost all of his stand users. After Polnareff, we have Kakyoin, whose ability is that Dio cannot move allies, items, or heroes. Probably the least annoying of Dio's opposition, but still very annoying. There are a handful of stand users that can interact with moving things, even heroes, and Dio likes being able to move around his knives and stand users at his leisure. Important thing to notice, by the way, is that Kakyoin does not stop you from playing Jotaro to adjacent locations. You aren't moving Jotaro when you defeat him, you're playing him, so Kakyoin doesn't stop you from doing that. The final hero is another Joestar, Joseph. His ability is that when Dio draws cards at the end of each turn, he draws one less card. Always a shame to have less options in hand, but even more so for Dio, whose ability gets better the more cards he can play. You'll want to get Joseph out of your territory pretty quick. Now that you know the heroes, let's take a look at the 3 fate effects that deal with heroes. We'll start with Faked Death. When played, the one playing it gets to choose a hero from Dio's fate discard pile and play them to Jotaro's location. If you recall, Jotaro cannot be defeated if there are any other heroes at his location, so this will be a hero you have to deal with as soon as he shows up. Next we have Found You, Dio, which is another hero player. Instead of the discard, however, this fate card lets the one playing it choose a hero from Dio's fate deck and play them to Dio's location, then shuffling the fate deck. Unlikely to be as annoying as Faked Death since it likely won't land the hero at Jotaro's location, but it's still getting a hero out there, which you now have to put up with. The last hero-focused fate effect is Restoration, which discards a hero or former hero from Dio's territory, then plays them to their previous location. Dio has a handful of ways to weaken heroes, either by strength tokens or attached items, and this will get rid of those and refresh a hero to max strength. It can also get heroes out of some stand users' abilities, like Daniel. Restoration can also target Jotaro, so be aware of that. If you've lowered Jotaro's strength or put Road Roller on him, then an opponent playing Restoration will undo that progress and put Jotaro back up to his usual 6 strength. Our last 2 effects are What a Pain and Aura. When What a Pain is played, each ally in Dio's territory loses 1 strength. You'll likely have a lot of stand users out and about ready to fight whatever heroes arrive, so having them get weakened is very less than ideal. Aura, when played, lets the one playing it discard an ally or item. This will obviously be a major target for your high-strength stand users, or even for your useful items like Dio's Coffin, knives, or even the Road Roller. Those flying fists are a major pain for Dio. The last card we need to look at is of course the Challenge, which in this case is Jotaro's stand, Star Platinum. When Star Platinum is out, Jotaro gets +3 strength, putting him at an insane 9 strength. That's a number basically impossible for clashing with, and makes it really hard for stand users to match up. That being said, since Dio can weaken heroes, you can try to power through it if the opportunity presents itself. To discard Star Platinum during his turn, Dio may pay 3 power and discard the World from his hand. The World is an important card for Dio since it gives him more actions, so having to discard it is less than ideal, even though he has 4 copies. The 3 power loss is pretty major as well, but given how much he has to defeat Jotaro, it's definitely worth the investment to get rid of that extra 3 strength. And that does it for how to play as Dio. Perhaps the most powerful stand user, you'll have to make use of your mini pawns to battle Jotaro across the world until facing him in a final clash of destiny to rid Dio of his cursed fate with the Joestar family. If you have any questions about Dio, feel free to leave a comment and I'll do my best to answer. Also look at the description for the playlist to see all the other anime Villainous how-to videos so you can learn about any other characters that interest you. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope to see you again for more anime Villainous videos in the future. Until then, farewell.